first signs of the fascinating Greek civilization were in Mycenaean Greece, with its work of art and religion that maintained that the gods at Mount Olympus were the explanation for life. It was also the historical setting for much of Greek mythology, including the Trojan War, which was narrated through Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, among others. It was followed by a recordless transitional period leading to Archaic Greece, an era in which Greek alphabet developed, the earliest surviving Greek literature was composed, monumental sculpture as well as the Olympic Games began, and the hoplite became the core of Greek armies. Most notably perhaps, Archaic Greece is known for the development of the poleis, hundreds of independent city-states that defined Greek political life for hundreds of years. Athens and Sparta were the two main city-states, and they were often rivals. Sparta was a closed society governed by an oligarchy ruled by two kings. The reason it was entirely organized around a powerful military was to maintain control and prevent rebellion of the Helots, semi-enslaved non-Spartan locals who constituted the majority of the population. Athens, on the other hand, grew to an open society that gradually thrived through arts, philosophy, and trade. In reaction to the aristocracy that oppressed the Athenian population, Athens gradually developed into one of the first democracies in the world by lowering the property qualifications for citizenship. As opposed to modern Western democracies, Athenian democracy was direct with no representatives and also excluded most of the population who were slaves and women. The Athenian loyalty to the Ionian kin obliged them to assist the Asiatic Greek revolt against the Achaemenid rule, which was not only suppressed by the powerful Persian Empire but also led King Darius to send a fleet to punish the Athenians. The outnumbered Greek army inflicted a decisive defeat on the Persians in the Battle of Marathon, which was a pivotal and shining moment in Athenian history, as it showed that Athens was able to beat the mighty Persians even without the Spartans. Athens rightly expected and prepared for a second Persian invasion by building a formidable navy of triremes. According to Herodotus, who is credited with being the first historian, the greatest army ever put together led by Xerxes of Persia attacked again. Although the Persians were able to capture and burn Athens, the Athenians ultimately won the war thanks in part to a very rare support from most Greek city-states, exemplified by the resistance of 300 Spartans that delayed the Persian army at the narrow pass. Athens emerged as a major superpower that led other city-states, some willing, some unwilling, in a defensive alliance against a potential third Persian invasion. It, however, harshly treated its allies, moved the ally treasury money to the Parthenon, and used it to fund the construction of temples in the city. Pericles became the head of this new financial center, restored the Acropolis, and transformed the alliance into an Athenian empire founded on naval power and trade. This new prosperity enabled the Athenian Golden Age, which saw unprecedented cultural and scientific achievements driven by rational thinking and logic. Hippocrates became the father of modern medicine, the first drama and comedy masterpieces were written, sculpture flourished, sophists such as Protagoras stated that man is the measure of all things, which constituted the root of humanism and the European Renaissance. The sense that there is no absolute good or bad was opposed by idealists such as Plato and his teacher Socrates, who was remembered for asking thought-provoking questions that challenged the underlying assumptions. Plato's student, Aristotle, focused more on science and practical matters, and was later a tutor for Alexander the Great. It was not long until the rivalry between the dominant Athenian Empire and the Spartan-led Peloponnesian League spilled into a war that engaged many Greek city-states and that ultimately shifted power from Athens to Sparta. Sparta then got engaged in wars with other city-states and gradually declined, leaving a power vacuum that was filled by Philip II and the Macedonians, distant relatives of the Greeks who had been regarded as semi-barbarians. After his father's assassination, Alexander the Great led a united Greek army beyond Greece for the first time, conquering not only mighty Persia but also most of the known world, thereby spreading Greek culture and language. After his death at the age of 32 without successor, his generals fought against each other and three major kingdoms eventually emerged and persisted for the next 300 years. Ruled by the descendants of Alexander's general Ptolemy, Egypt thrived and Alexandria, which was founded by Alexander himself, became the most prominent city of the Hellenistic world. It emerged as a wealthy trade and cultural center famous for its library and its lighthouse, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Besides the new heights reached in art, literature, and poetry, we owe our basic ideas about geometry and the concept of mathematical proofs to Hellenistic mathematicians. Post-Socratic philosophers established four schools of philosophy, and among others they would influence Christianity and Western thinkers for thousands of years. The Hellenistic world ultimately fell to the Romans in 31 BC when Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra's fleet and conquered Ptolemaic Egypt. Although the Greeks would not gain self-determination until the 19th century, their culture fascinated the Romans, who integrated many of its aspects and spread it throughout Europe. It was then revived during the European Renaissance to become the foundation of Western civilization.
Paintings during the classical era were most commonly found in vases, panels, and tombs. It depicts natural figures with dynamic composition. Most of the subjects were battle scenes, mythological figures, and everyday scenes. It reveals the grasp of linear perspective and naturalist representation. Ancient Greek arts stand out among that of other ancient culture. They emphasize the importance and accomplishments of human being. The usual paintings that we can see on the tomb usually shows the life event of the people. Much artwork from the Greek era was a government-sponsored and intended for public display. We have the most common methods of Greek painting. Number 1 is the fresco method, and number 2 is the encaustic method. The fresco method is a method of painting with water-based pigments on a freshly applied plaster, usually on the wall surface. The painting becomes an integral part of the wall. The colors are made with the chlorine powder pigments in pure water, dry and set with the plaster to become a permanent part of the wall. It is ideal for murals, durable, and has a matte style. It was developed in Italy about 13th century and perfected during the Renaissance period. The origin of the fresco is unknown, but it was used as early as Minoan civilization. Above paintings are samples of a fresco method. The next one is the encaustic method. Encaustic method is made with filtered wax and dammar resin crystals. Encaustic paintings need to be protected under glass. Encaustic paintings are environmentally safer as they do not emit no toxic fumes and they do not use solvent. The above paintings are some of the samples of encaustic method.
I hope you're all well. Alright, so this time I'll discuss the three major styles in Greek sculpture. So firstly, let's talk about the Archaic period. This period runs from the middle of the 8th century BCE until the beginning of the 5th century BCE. Statues produced during this period are clearly inspired by Egyptian and Mesopotamian sculpture. Overall, the statues look very rigid. The face, the upper body, and the lower body are all pointed forward. The figure may seem to step forward, or sometimes the arms are raised, holding a weapon, for example, but the posture generally appears too stiff to convincingly create the illusion of movement. Details in the face, the hair, and clothing are all highly stylized and almost cartoonish rather than realistic. Towards the end of the period, we can often see what is called the archaic smile. Let's move on to the classical period, which stretches from the early 5th century BCE to the late 4th century BCE. This one is the shortest of the three periods. During the classical period, the pose, face, drapery, and other details become more realistic. Perhaps most revolutionary was the introduction of the so-called contrapposto. The figures seem to put most of their weight on one leg. In the case of these two statues here, it's the right leg. Their right hips are higher than their left hips, but for the shoulders it's the other way around. The contrapposto makes the depicted figure look more relaxed and realistic. Then thirdly, there's the Hellenistic period, stretching from the late 4th century BCE to the late 1st century BCE. By the beginning of this period, statues had gradually become less idealized, more realistic, and more expressive. This trend continued throughout the Hellenistic period. The size of the eyes and details such as hair, clothing, and muscles became increasingly lifelike. Although the relaxed contrapposto remained very common, sculptors now also experimented with more complex and dynamic poses, very convincingly creating the illusion of motion. Sculptors also started to create statue groups to take their sculptures to the next level and have several characters interact with one another, typically in a very emotional fashion.
Architecture. The ancient Greeks were experts at designing and constructing buildings, in part because of their excellent understanding of mathematics. Ancient Greek architecture is best known for its use of columns. They came in three styles or orders: Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Many Roman buildings were built in the Greek style. Modern architects have also been influenced by ancient Greek design. You can see this influence in buildings such as the Bank of England in London, Birmingham Art Gallery, and the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. The Acropolis. One of the most well-preserved and well-known examples of ancient Greek architecture is the Acropolis of Athens. It was a city built on a hill and surrounded by a strong defensive wall. Each building was dedicated to a god or goddess. There were altars, temples, and sanctuaries. People came from miles around to give gifts to the gods, to ask the priests to pray for them, and to celebrate religious festivals. Some of the buildings are still standing today. These include the Temple of Athena Nike, the Parthenon, and the Theater of Dionysus. The Parthenon. At the center of the Acropolis was an impressive temple called the Parthenon. It was dedicated to the goddess Athena. There was once a huge statue of Athena inside, made of gold and ivory. The temple was built on a platform of 3 steps. The roof was held up by posts and lintels. The posts were tall Doric columns. They ran around the outer edge of the building and were connected to each other at the top with lintels.